So you might be wondering, why would you use an array? Well, arrays are very powerful and they give you a lot of stuff right out of the box. You can add, remove items from the array. You can also splice, and there's really a lot of things you can do with arrays. So there's these what's called as array methods. So this is a quick example of how you can add content to the array, and there's a lot of different methods that are available within arrays. So we've got our typical array. We can find out a length of the array. So we know that there's 2 items in there, so that's where we're getting that length. We can also do index into out of an item, so we can subtract. So knowing that we've got the length of the array, and we could subtract 1, so that will give us the last item that's within the array. So basically giving us that banana, so there's some flexibility over returning those items. We can loop through, so we can iterate through the arrays, and there's going to be a little bit more on loops coming up. There's also, you can add items to the end of the array. So in this case, using the push method, so referencing the array, and then we use push, and then specify the value that we want to add in. And as you can see, this array has now changed. It's got apple, banana, and orange. You can use pop to remove out the last item from the end of the array. There's also shift, so that gives you the ability to remove an item from the front of the array, and then you can add an item in the front of the array using unshift. You can also find an index value of an item in the array. So there's using index of, and if there is no value, if that item banana is not within the array, then it's going to return back a -1. And this is often used in order to quickly search for the contents of the array, and you do a condition to check to see if index of banana is equal to -1, and if it is, then you know it's not found in the array. You can also remove an item by its index position, so that's using splice. And I know there's been quite a few things that we're going over, and I'm going to show you some examples of these. There's also removing items from an index position. There's copying arrays. So I think you get the picture. There's just a ton of stuff that you can do with arrays, and that's why everybody loves using arrays. So this lesson challenge, of course, has to do with arrays. The objective is to use various methods that we've looked at in order to transform the array below from this to this. Actually, quite a few possibilities, and I can walk you through some of the options that we have using the index of, push, pop, shift, unshift, splice in order to rebuild this array and change the value. We can also get things back like the length, and of course try that out, output it into the console, and see how you can make adjustments to the array, trying out all these different common methods that are available for arrays. And I'll walk you through it. So you can pause the video, try this on your own as well. I'm going to walk you through some of these methods. So let's start with our favorite list array. And there's our items sitting there in the list array. So let's we can console log it out, or we could just simply look into the console here. So you see you've got a length. You can also see when you press the dot, Chrome is giving us some suggestions of what we can do. So we can do all of these different methods. So let's try some of these out, and we're going to manipulate the array. We're also going to be constantly console logging out the list to see where we're at. So checking the list. So let's make some updates to the array. So we can check to see if it is an array. So if it's a valid array, we can do array is array, temp equal array is array. And we'll also output the value of temp as we refresh it, so we can see those values within the console of the browser. So we see that it is a valid array, so that's a good thing. Let's update the array. So we're taking the list and selecting value with the index of number 1. And let's update that to hello world. So now when we refresh, our value for the last name has updated. We can also return back index values, so using temp again as our variable, and then the list array. Let's check for an index of, and we'll look for the value that we've updated and replaced. So we see that temp comes back as -1 because it's no longer within the array. Let's check for Lawrence, and that one has an index value of 0. Let's check for 35. that has an index value of -1 because we're checking for a string and there's only a number available there. So if we do 35 as a number, you can see that it does get returned. So remember that there is a difference between strings and numbers, and it will differentiate between the difference. Let's make some more updates to the array. So adding in push, and we'll just call this one pushed. You can see that it gets added to the end of the array. And this time we're going to do pop. So it's removing the last one. So basically it removed the one that we added. There's also shift. So it removes the first element from the array. And another neat thing is if you want to get the value that's being returned back, if you want to get the value that's popped, then you can see that we did get this value being returned back. It will make the update to the array, but then it will also return back that value that it pulled out. So if you do want to use that within your code, you can always reference that value in a variable and then make use of it within your code. There is unshift as well. So it's adding an element to the beginning. So just call that unshift so that we can see that within the array. So it's going to add it to the beginning of the array. So it's added in the 0 position. So it shifted all the rest of the index values. And that's why setting the values using this type of format, we're using the index format, this isn't the best way to go about it because as we've seen, these array values can be shifting and changing. So there's quite a bit of stuff that can happen with arrays. So you're also probably wondering, well, what happens if we do temp and an unshift? So what this will do is this will return back the length. So the length is 8. And if we had more items in there, so if I added in one more in there, you can see that it's returning back the length of the array. So as we're updating values, you can see that those are updating the length of the array. So that's what's being returned back. So unshift will add it to the front of the array, so it makes it first. What splice does is it changes the content of the array, adding new elements while removing old ones. So this is an interesting one. So what slice will do is this, as we can see, it added an item, but it also removed out items. So basically we started at index value 1 and we removed out a couple items from index value number 1. And if we use temp, you can see what's being returned there is the 2 items that got removed out. So that's what we can do with splice. So our starting index position of where we want to remove it, and then how many items we want to remove out of the array. So I know this lesson covered quite a bit of stuff, and it is important to understand all the different things that you can do with arrays. And this is really just scratching the surface. Within the Mozilla Developer Network, we saw there is so much power and so many things that you can do with arrays. So even more is going to be coming up in the next lesson.